Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to St. Lucie Rise, Resilience and Self-Empowerment. Again, this is Teresa Bishop, Executive Director for the Roundtable of St. Lucie County. And as you know, St. Lucie Rise is an initiative of our Behavioral Health Task Force. We're really excited today because we have an opportunity to speak to some of our community partners from Treasure Coast Hospice for the Good Grief program. And we want to talk a little bit about children's grief. Orlea Marquardt, who is a member of our Behavioral Health Task Force. So we're really excited to have the members come on board to talk about the program. And we also have Zamaris Webster, who's also joining us to have this fireside chat around children's grief. Grief is very important. Sometimes young people are experiencing that for so many different reasons, and we don't even know how to recognize it. We don't know how to deal with it. So we want to focus this time on understanding what this looks like and what this month is. So I'll start off right away. November 19th is a special day that's coming up here in our community. Can you, I'm going to direct this correct question to Orlea. What is the significance of November 19th and why is it important to us in our community?
Good morning. Thank you for having us. Yes, the 19th is the National Children's Grief Awareness Day. And this day was brought about just to recognize children's grief in our country. A lot of times children's disenfranchised because children simply, and so they really want to heighten the awareness that, and even though it might look different, it impacts their entire life. So in the state of Florida, 1 in 13 children will lose a parent or sibling by the time they're 18. If my math is correct, about 7.6% of the children will be grieving a parent or sibling loss, which is about greater than 317,000 children in our state. And that doesn't even include the important people in their lives. You know, there's a lot of caregivers, guardians, aunts, uncles, grandparents, important teachers in the child's life who they also may lose. And so those numbers are really quite, I think, low. So a lot of children are grieving, and it's really important to find ways to support them.
Absolutely. So I'm glad that we have a designated day for us to take a pause around that. You know, it's we're just establishing a new work group here in St. Lucie County from the Lincoln Park Advisory Committee because, you know, there's been a tremendous amount of gang violence in that community. People have lost classmates and siblings and friends, and oftentimes because it happens in the community and not necessarily in a school environment, then there's not always a response. But a number of young people inside the city who have seen this are experiencing grief. So we're hoping that we're able to respond as well. And responding for all kids, because there's all different types of grief that's going on in our community. But we'll dig a little bit further as we go. What are some of the misconceptions that you find about grief in general about children and their ability to grieve or not?
So thanks again. I'm Zamaris. So thank you for having us. It's definitely our honor to give as much education as we possibly can. So some of the misconceptions how they grieve, like Orly mentioned, they do grieve differently from adults. You know, often we find children aren't necessarily, doesn't always present as sad, or they're not crying nearly as much as an adult would, or they're not as expressive with their grief. We tend to believe that they are not grieving because they're playing their games and they're kind of going about their day, and it doesn't necessarily look like our sadness does as adults. But the difference is with children is that they grieve very differently from us in the terms of physical. They start showing signs of like headaches. They start complaining of headaches and stomach aches. They start having difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating at school, start having some more outbursts or tantrums. They start becoming a little bit more clingy to a parent or wanting election. So it does look a little bit different from us because they're not necessarily always able to verbalize, I am sad because of this. or I'm feeling, learning how to teach them how to cope with those feelings and sort of navigate their grief process is definitely really important. It's something that we always want to work with our kids who are grieving, as well as the families, to figure out how they can support them in that time.
Oh yeah, so that's interesting because um, a lot of times we see kids acting out, and sometimes they get punished for that because
Mm-hmm.
they're not faring very well, and because we haven't recognized that they may be grieving, and it could be happening right under our nose. Which leads me to the next question: does grief only happen after a loved one has died? Is there other types of grief?
Um, Grief encompasses a lot of different areas of life. I think right now with COVID-19, there's a lot of grief that's outside of the death of a loved one. But even as we look at when a loved one is in the dying process, there's something called anticipatory grief. We start that process or when there's big changes in life, such as when there's a serious illness in the family, the adjustment to the illness, all the grief that comes with the secondary losses around that illness, whether it's a loss of income or the loss of daily routines. Maybe there's chemotherapy treatments that come aboard, and that changes how the adult in a child's life can take care of them. So there's lots of different grief reactions that occur with any type of loss. And for children, especially, I think it's important to recognize that there's something called regrieving phenomenon that occurs. So as children change developmentally, they start thinking about grief differently with each developmental milestones. So if they had a loss that maybe was 4 or 5 years ago, but now they're hitting a new developmental milestone, they're starting to comprehend the impact on that loss differently. They'll have to go through another grieving process and grief reactions at that age.
That's pretty interesting. And I would say even now with COVID, where folks have lost loved ones and they weren't able to get closure. They couldn't go into the hospital, for example, to say goodbye, or sometimes things happen so quickly. I know when it happens like that, that can get really complicated with seeing kids with that. Orlea?
Yeah, I think you made a great point there, because when you think about that opportunity to say goodbye to a loved one, if you have that chance, that really initiates the mourning process. And the rituals that occur after death, the funerals and all this people in your life that come and say bring meals, and that social support that occurs after death has been disrupted with COVID-19. So the mourning process has really not been able to be initiated in the same way. So the grief has been delayed, and there's been real disruption to the healing. So we're seeing a lot of complications that are arising from COVID-19 when children are grieving and the adults in their lives are grieving.
Yeah, I can imagine. I have actually had some friends that they have had to experience that. It's tough on adults, let alone a child not being able to express that. So my next question is for Zamaris. Zamaris, why is it important for children to have a safe place to grieve?
I think it's important for a child or even adults to have a safe space to grieve. As I mentioned before, kids start exhibiting a lot of their grief symptoms very different from adults do. And so kids will sometimes come out of a very random place. So let's say, for example, they're coloring or they're eating dinner, and randomly they'll be like, I remember when Pop did this, or they'll start asking about, what's heaven like? Where do you think my person is? And then very seemingly get their question answered, and then just kind of go about their day. And so that is part of the way that children grieve. That's how they think. They're very concrete thinkers. They like to have something to hold on to, and they don't necessarily always kind of sit in that same space that we as adults do, where it's like it starts ruminating and we're kind of in this space all day. And so kids often will come up very randomly and ask questions like that. As adults, sometimes it feels very off-putting. It's sort of like, wow, that's coming out of left field. I wasn't emotionally prepared for that. How do I respond to that? If I'm also grieving, children will ask, Like, what do you think is heaven is like? And all of a sudden the adult is missing and experiencing their sadness. And so sometimes there are some emotional reactions, which is a good thing, to be able to demonstrate that for the kid, that it's okay for me to be sad and still love and miss that person and talk about that person even in sadness. So it's really important that kids feel safe in being able to have those moments when it does come up, because it may not always be as consistent as us as adults would present. So it's really important that they have that person that they can go to and just ask very random questions.
Now, speaking of randomness, this is something random that I do want to ask you. When we were doing our focus groups the other day, talking to some of the folks in the community that have suffered loss of a sudden loss due to a violent incident in the community, one of the questions that came up is, how do we tell? How do we tell this 5-year-old that, grandpa's not coming home? And they were absolutely asking for, approaches and tools. Do you have any pointers for caregivers like myself, or those who that they lost someone very close? How do you tell that child, especially when they're young, under 10 years old, 5 years old? And I'll ask Orlea.
That's a really good question. And, that's part of our services too, is to be able to help the caregivers in our community answer those questions and talk to their children. So what we really want to emphasize is to use simple language and concrete language. So using death and dying, I know those are two words that are a little bit taboo in our society. We tend to shy away from using those words, but saying death, dying, using concrete language like, his body stopped working, and then let the child's questions guide the conversation. So oftentimes as adults, a child will come to us and ask this really profound question, and you're scrambling to find the right answer. And it's more simple than a simple answer, it always works, and they're just looking for that concrete information, and then they'll go back, they'll think about it, and they'll come back with another answer or question, And oftentimes, especially with the younger kids, they'll ask the same question over and over again, and that's normal. And it's just kind of giving them the same answer and keeping it very concrete. And, when if you can do a funeral, explaining to them prior to the funeral what that's going to look like, just giving them an idea to take away the not knowing piece, the uncertainty of what they can expect to see at that funeral really helps.
So let's just stay in that vein. That's very helpful. As a caregiver, what should I know about supporting a child that is grieving?
So as a caregiver, I think what's really important is to really just to connect to your child. So when you see them kind of looking, sad, acknowledge that and just label it for them. It seems like you're sad. And then that gives them the opportunity to start learning those emotional words so that it's okay to express their feelings. And B, it lets them answer you whether you're in the right or wrong. Like they can say, no, I'm not really sad right now, or I am sad. And then you can explore why and kind of have those conversations. And then also just always provide that reassurance to them. Being able to reassure them, sometimes that's just through a physical hug. The younger kids, that's what they need, is just to be hugged and know that they're okay and in that moment. And then also, I think a lot of caregivers, when something really tragic happens in a child's life, they get worried about, like, they feel so bad that they stop boundaries. They start, relaxing on the rules, and then the child doesn't know what to do because those rules kind of keep them safe. And their routines are really safe for them. And so all of a sudden the routines are out the door, and they're now feeling really even less safe than what they once were, like with the death. So keeping them in a routine is always, always good, as much as you can. And being able to set boundaries appropriate appropriately is okay too. Like, it's okay to, if this is our rule and you're not following our rule, it's okay to set that boundary even when children are grieving, because that lets them know that, hey, our world is still okay.
Very nice. So lots of support is needed when children are grieving. How can communities and schools support young children who are grieving, or young? I say young children, but teens, adolescents also. How can we support them?
So, so when we're talking about schools and some of our community agencies, like Orly said, really maintaining a level of consistency. So even the structure of school is very, very important. Maintaining the structure and the routine for our kids. When it comes to like teachers, there are a lot of times where teachers are able to develop some social connections with their students and are able to hold that space for them. So for some of these kids, they may not have necessarily a supportive environment to be able to receive that. So sometimes the community, their teacher, their school system is their support system. So it's very similar as a caregiver, and being able to hold that space and being able to provide that additional support. But again, just remaining consistent. Part of our programs and what we do is we do provide services within the school system and community and with our community partners to sort of provide that support. When we're talking about children who have experienced the loss of another student, I think it's also very important, because that does happen, unfortunately, where there are other fellow students that have died, that the school as a whole are able to hold that space, because it's not just one person that's grieving, it's the entire school system. And so whether it's developing a support group or an after school event or something to be able to give the space for all students to grieve, and knowing that it's not just me who's experiencing this, it is my fellow classmates, it is the teachers, it is the people within the school setting that are grieving as well. It is very similar to community agencies. You know, when we think about, like you said, there's a lot of programs for murdered victims and families and things like that, because it is something that's unexpected. And so how do you grieve in that space? And so it is about holding that space, whether it's a church, whether it is a community program. It's important that everyone has that space, whether it's together as a team or individually, to grieve and feel safe in that.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think as we're talking to our community partners, I think it's important that we bring this forward, because oftentimes, especially when something doesn't happen in the school, or they don't know about it, and it's affected a lot of children. If it's a classmate, for example, sometimes our kids are showing up to school and they need support, and I'm hoping there's a way we can identify that and say, hey, this kid absolutely needs some support because of what they experienced. So that is something for consideration, both in the community-based organizations too, because some things happen on the weekend in the community. And so how do you handle that? And particularly now with 911, not 911, but 211 calls at an all-time high, different things are happening in our community. We want our community to be resilient and be prepared for unexpected things that can happen in the community. So that definitely was a helpful answer to that. We mentioned a little bit earlier about COVID, right? So we know that it interrupts the grieving process. But with that, you have kids who may experience fear as a result of that too. Well, grandma or my uncle died of COVID, am I going to get it? Part of that grieving process, how do you deal with the fear and them fearing death and their own mortality? I mean, that's a question that I wonder.
That's a really good question. And we have seen a lot of that fear come up in our sessions, just because, we're immersed in it right now, right? We're hearing about COVID all the time. It's on the news. So the kids never really get a break from hearing about COVID. And so it's, finding, again, like Zamara said, giving them that space to talk about those fears and to explore them and find ways to cope with them. Whether it's just, reminding them what they are in control of right now and how they are keeping themselves safe. And then, of course, processing the grief of the lost loved one if, alongside that fear is really important. And, for kids, like Zamara said, mentioned too, in children's grief processes, it's emotional bursts of grief, right? So they have the grief and then they go on and play. And right now, what I'm finding with a lot of the kids is that their normal outlets are not there. So their sports that they do, whether it's football or community, that pick up basketball, whatever, those sport activities or other social activities aren't happening. So they don't have the same outlets to kind of express their feelings or at least emote their feelings. So finding ways for children to be able to release that energy is really important, and finding outlets maybe as a family that we maybe never did before, like whether it's like going for a walk together or just finding activities at home to help express those emotions is really, really important right now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Arlea. I mean, you can't just go out and run and play or do something to distract it, the grief. You're sitting in it now. So now it's more important that we have opportunities for our young people to process that. And one of those opportunities may be the Treasure Coast Hospice Good Grief Program. I understand that you have this program. Can you tell us a little bit about the Good Grief Program that helps families in our community?
Absolutely. I would be happy to tell you about our programs. So we have a myriad of different types of programs on how we support our children and families individually and as an entire family system, as well as a school system or community systems. So one of our programs is our Youth and Families program. So we do provide services here in the office. We are taking health and safety precautions, but we are providing in-office sessions. So it could be in a child individually, or it can be an entire family, just depending on what the needs are and who's looking for support or who would benefit the most from the support. So we're providing it by in-office, by phone, and video sessions as well. And how we support our community or school systems is we are also going out to schools. So for some families who are unable to make it here to our office because of transportation, particularly for people who have lost a partner or a spouse where they have to work. They have no choice. They don't have the financial means to be able to take time off of work to bring their child here to the office. So we go out and we provide support in the school during a specific period. We also can provide groups within schools. So if we have a specific school that is, maybe it's a shared loss, maybe it's a student that had died, maybe it was a group of children who have lost their parents. And we can specialize an entire group around what the need of the school or the community is. And we've also gone out and done some community-based support groups as well. So we have plenty of programs to be tapped into to be able to provide as much support as we possibly can.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. How do I access the program? I mean, or how do I refer people to the program? How do I get that information out so that they know that they can contact you? And are there some costs associated with that, Orlea?
Yeah, so you can call us directly at 772-403-4530. And from there, you'll be connected to a counselor. And like we do an intake, and it's very simple. And we figure out what's the best means of providing the support to you. So that's either, like Zamara said, in office or in school, or we're still doing telehealth as well right now. Our programs are totally funded through our community partners, as well as through donations by the community. So what's one thing about our programs is that we don't charge for them. So regardless of your ability to pay, we're here for you. And what's really nice too about that is, say you are needing additional mental health services. So because we don't bill insurance, we can come alongside those mental health services and do the grief piece while other issues are being attended to by the mental health provider.
Okay, thank you. Well, one of the last but very important questions I want to ask you, we got the holidays coming up. Thanksgiving is coming up. Christmas is coming up. My daughter and I was just talking to you the other day because we have experienced a tremendous amount of loss the last couple of years. And it's like, what are some tips on how you can deal with that, remembering all of the traditions that you have around Thanksgiving now that person is missing? And the traditions around Christmas. What are some of the things that you recommend families do in the wake of loss around the holidays?
I think it's different for every family. I think for some families, it's so important to maintain a lot of those rituals. It is important to do the grandma's pie that she absolutely made every year, and it was the best one. And so for some people, they find a lot of comfort in that. And so maintaining a lot of those rituals, if it's important to the family. There are some families that are just say, you know what, this year, this is a rough year, this is our first year, and I don't know how to deal with that, and I don't want to deal with that. Maybe just not having a celebration, or just calling it a dinner, as opposed to saying we're going to do Thanksgiving, or we're going to do Christmas, or we're going to do New Year's. Sometimes that's normalizing that it's okay that sometimes we just don't want to celebrate because this person is not there. Finding little ways to maintain that connection with that person. So whether it's having a setting at the table, whether it's putting a candle, or if the family comes together and does something, make something together, whether it's a candle or a plate or some sort of memorial type thing for their person, and hold space for that at the table, because their memory is still there. Their memory still lives within all of you guys. And so it does hold space to say, yes, this person is physically not here, but that doesn't mean that their memory has to die along with them. So every family is different. So it just really all depends on what you and your family want to do.
I love that. That is so on point. That's what we went through. My daughter and I was just talking about that because last year we lost my sister. And last year we were like, we didn't really want to celebrate. But this year it's like, she loved the holidays. She loved decorating. So we were just talking yesterday. It was like, okay, let's decorate the house like Aunt Belinda. Let's do Christmas the way she does it, because we want to take that tradition back. It made me sad thinking about burning a candle, but those are some very helpful tips. We thank you for that, Samaris. With that, I just want to thank you. This interview went very quickly. I could talk with you guys forever, but I really want to thank Arlea Marquette as well as Samaris Webster from Treasure Coast Hospice, and all that you provided for us. This is important information for us. Is there something else that you wanted to share in finale?
We just want to finish off by saying to remember to wear blue on Thursday to bring awareness to children's grief. And on our website, we have all these PDF files that you can print to take a picture with and upload it to social media, just to keep raising the awareness about children's grief this Thursday.
I love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us, and we are definitely going to support this being National Grief Month on the 19th. We're looking forward to that, and we hope that to the audience, we hope that you got something really good out of that. This is just another set of information to put in your toolbox as we rise together, because as you know, we are better together. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.